It exists only as a whisper. A rumor traded in grainy video comments and late-night podcasts, dismissed by the daylight logic of the mainstream. He's done. He burned that bridge. There is zero chance. WrestleMania 42 was supposed to be the coronation, the final chapter of a story years in the making. The confetti was falling, the pyro smoke still hanging in the rafters of the stadium, a sea of 80,000 souls chanting the name of their new, triumphant champion. They had endured the struggle, they had finished the story, and this moment, this feeling of collective catharsis, was their reward. The champion, tears streaming down his face, held the gold aloft. This was it, the happy ending. The screen was preparing to fade to black, the announcers signing off on a historic night. But the cameras lingered. They held on the champion's face just a fraction of a second too long. The music in the stadium seemed to dip, just slightly, as if an engineer had accidentally leaned on a fader. A few people in the front row noticed it first. A faint, crackling hiss underneath the celebratory roar. A sound like a vinyl record reaching its end, skipping in the groove. The champion paused, his smile tightening. He looked toward the production truck, confused. The roar of the crowd began to falter, morphing from celebration to a low, collective murmur of confusion. The stadium lights flickered, once, twice, and then plunging 80,000 people into absolute, suffocating darkness. Silence. Not a quiet, respectful silence, but a heavy, anxious void. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. You could hear a single cup drop in the upper deck. People held their breath, their phones held up, tiny lights searching the blackness. And then it came. A sound so familiar, yet so impossible, that the entire stadium experienced a shared hallucination. A single, sharp thwack of static. Then the opening guitar riff. A sound that didn't belong here, a sound from a ghost. The crowd didn't cheer. They gasped. It was the sound of 80,000 people realizing the rumor was true. The lights on the massive ramp exploded to life, blinding white, cutting through the darkness, and in the center, silhouetted against the glare, stood a shadow. He didn't move. He just stood there, letting the music wash over the arena. Cult of personality. The myth was real. The whispers were right. He let the moment hang, a masterpiece of tension, forcing the audience to beg for it. The champion in the ring, his face pale, had lowered the title. His story, the one that was supposed to be the ending, had just become the prelude. The shadow took one step, then another. The camera finally focused, and the world saw him. Older, scarred, but his eyes burning with the same fire that had set the world ablaze a decade ago. CM Punk was back. He walked slowly. Every step was deliberate, a hammer blow against the foundation of the company he had once tried to burn to the ground. He wasn't wearing wrestling gear, he was wearing street clothes, a black hoodie, the hood down, and jeans. He looked less like a returning superstar and more like a man who had walked in off the street to reclaim something that had been stolen from him. The announcers were silent. Their professionalism, their training, had abandoned them. They were fans, just like everyone else, mouths open, unable to process the reality of the image. The champion in the ring hadn't moved. He was frozen, a statue of disbelief, the heavyweight championship hanging limply from his hand. Punk reached the ring, climbed the steel steps with that same familiar, arrogant gait, and stepped through the ropes. The music cut. The silence rushed back in, now heavier, more volatile. The two men stood 10 feet apart, the living embodiment of two different eras, the past and the present, the man who left and the man who stayed. He champion, representing honor and tradition, and the iconoclast, representing rebellion and chaos. Punk's eyes scanned the crowd, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. He saw the signs. He heard the chants. He absorbed the energy, breathing it in like oxygen. Finally, his gaze settled on the champion. He didn't look at the title. He looked directly into the man's eyes. The champion was shaking. Whether from adrenaline or fear, nobody could tell. This moment wasn't in the script. This wasn't rehearsed. This was real. He had just achieved his life's dream, and it had been hijacked by the one man whose shadow loomed larger than any title. The champion took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He was the standard bearer. He had to be the bigger man. He did the unthinkable. He lowered the championship to the mat, a gesture of respect, and slowly, cautiously, extended his right hand. A peace offering, an acknowledgement. "Welcome back." The stadium hushed. This was the moment. Would Punk shake it? Would he spit in his face? This single handshake would define the next year. Punk stared at the outstretched hand. The seconds ticked by, feeling like hours. The camera zoomed in, capturing the smallest details. The tremble in the champion's fingers, the cold stillness in Punk's eyes. And then, Punk's face softened. Just a little. He nodded once. And he reached out, grasping the champion's hand. He pulled him in, not for an attack, but for an embrace. A one-armed hug. The stadium exploded. It was louder than the pinfall. It was forgiveness. It was validation. It was the prodigal son returning and the new king welcoming him home. This wasn't just a return. It was a unification. The war was over. The champion smiled, relief washing over his face. He'd done it. He had navigated the impossible. He had shown respect, and it had been returned. He raised their joined hands in the air, a symbolic passing of the torch, or perhaps a sharing of it. The crowd was crying, cheering, embracing. This was the greatest WrestleMania moment of all time, the perfect, unexpected happy ending to the perfect story. The champion turned to the crowd, still holding Punk's hand, to soak in the adulation. He was the king, and the rebel had just endorsed his reign. But the camera held on Punk's face, and his expression hadn't changed. The smile was gone. His eyes were still cold. He hadn't let go of the champion's hand. The champion, feeling the grip tighten, turned back, his own smile fading, replaced by confusion. "Punk?" he seemed to mouth. Punk yanked him. He spun the champion around, still clinging to that handshake, and pulled him violently into his shoulder. The thud echoed through the stadium. A sound of impact, of cartilage and bone. He had never let go. The hug was a setup. The handshake was the anchor. He hoisted the champion onto his shoulders in one fluid, terrifying motion. The stadium went from pure elation to horrified, silent shock in less than a second. Go. 2. Sleep. The champion's body hit the mat, the title clattering beside his unconscious head. 80,000 people went silent. The only sound was the humming of the ring microphone, which Punk, with chilling calm, bent over to pick up. He never looked down at the man he had just laid out. He stood over him, a predator admiring his work. The confetti, which had been falling for the champion, now landed on Punk's shoulders, a bitter, ironic coronation. He looked around the stadium at the faces of utter betrayal. He saw children crying. He saw grown men staring, their minds unable to reconcile the joy of 3 seconds ago with the horror of now. He waited. He let the silence become an accusation. He let their hope curdle into hatred. He raised the microphone to his lips, the static of his breath amplified to a roar. "I'm not the bigger man," he whispered. The words landed like a brick through a window. "I'm the best man." He dropped the microphone, its feedback screaming into the night. He hadn't returned to pass a torch. He hadn't returned to make peace. He had returned to burn the very concept of a happy ending to the ground. This wasn't just an attack. This wasn't just revenge for things past. This, as the world was realizing, was a message. The revolution was dead. This was a hostile takeover. The aftermath was a vacuum. The broadcast ended abruptly, not with a celebratory logo, but with a hard cut to black, leaving the world hanging on that scream of feedback. The post-show press conference was a scene of unprecedented chaos. The seat reserved for the champion remained hauntingly empty. Medical staff had rushed the ring, but Punk had simply walked through them, parting the sea of officials like a dark prophet, and disappeared back into the darkness from which he came. When the company's chief executive finally took the podium, he looked pale, shaken. The reporters, usually so composed, shouted questions over each other. Was this planned? What is Punk's contractual status? Is the champion cleared to compete? The executive just shook his head, holding up a hand for silence. We have no comment on the situation at this time. Our priority is the health of our champion. He couldn't even say his name. He looked like a man who had lost control of his own multi-billion-dollar empire because, for one night, he had. The reality era that Punk himself had ushered in all those years ago had just come back to bite its creator. There was no work. There was no angle. There was just a man, his broken dream, and the ghost who had returned to shatter it. Backstage, the locker room was a funeral. The generation that had built the company back up in Punk's absence felt utterly disrespected. They saw the champion, their leader, as a man who had been sacrificed for a cheap, shocking moment. They saw Punk's return not as a triumph, but as an invasion. The veterans, the few who had shared a locker room with him a decade ago, just shook their heads. They weren't surprised. They were just sad. "That's him," one was overhead saying. "That's the man we knew. He has to be the center of the storm, even if he has to create the storm himself." The media, meanwhile, had lost its mind. Pundits who had praised the return just minutes before were now condemning the act as selfish, as a betrayal of the fans' trust. But a new, darker narrative was also emerging. Online, the numbers were exploding. The betrayal had more views in 1 hour than the entire rest of the show. Merchandise featuring Punk's face, old and new, sold out instantly. The company had a monster on its hands. He had hijacked their biggest show, assaulted their biggest star, and held their narrative hostage. And in doing so, he had become the single most talked-about entity on the planet. The next night, on Raw, the arena was buzzing with a toxic electric energy. They weren't there to cheer or boo. They were there to witness. There was no opening music, no pyro, no hype video. The show just started, the lights coming up on the ring where CM Punk was already sitting, cross-legged in the center. He wore a plain black shirt, and the stolen championship title was laid across his lap. The crowd was a mix of furious boos and defiant chants. He just waited, letting them exhaust themselves, that same cold, patient smile on his face. When they finally quieted down, he spoke. His voice was soft, almost relaxing. "You thought I came back for him?" He gestured to the empty space beside him. "You thought I came back for this?" He tapped the championship. "You people, you never understood." He explained that he didn't watch the product. He didn't care about the new stars. He didn't care who finished what story. He said he was at home, comfortable, when he saw a commercial. He saw the company promoting WrestleMania 42 as the greatest of all time. He saw them claiming they had built a new era, and he took it as a personal insult. "You can't build an era without the man who defined one," he said. "You can't have a happy ending while I'm still breathing. I didn't come back to join your story. I came back to erase it." And that's when the realization settled over everyone. The twist wasn't the attack. The twist was the motive. We, the audience, had projected our own desire for reconciliation onto him. We wanted the forgiveness. We wanted the happy ending. We saw the handshake and we built a fantasy. All in the span of 30 seconds. He didn't betray the champion. He betrayed us. He betrayed our hope. The promo wasn't the words he spoke on Raw. The promo was the act itself. The handshake, the hug, the turn. That was the pipe bomb. He wasn't just a character in a story. He was a mirror, reflecting our own naive desire to believe that the angriest, most broken parts of our past can be neatly redeemed. He proved in one terrifying silent moment that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be monuments to the fire. He didn't just win a title. He had taken the entire concept of hope hostage, and as the show faded to black, we were all left wondering if he was right. Maybe, in the end, the only thing real is the betrayal.